Once upon a time, there was a young boy named Daniel. He lived in a faraway land called Israel. Daniel loved God very much. He prayed every day and listened to God's words. Daniel had many friends and loved to help people whenever they needed him. One day, a big, strong king named Nebuchadnezzar came to Israel with his soldiers. They captured Daniel and some of his friends and took them far away to a place called Babylon. Daniel felt scared, but he knew that God was with him, no matter where he went. When Daniel and his friends arrived in Babylon, the king told them they had to learn the ways of Babylon. They were given new clothes, new names, and had to live in the palace. Daniel missed his home. But he kept praying to God every day. Even though Daniel was in a new place, he decided to be brave and trust God. He believed that God had a special plan for him. Daniel was about to go on an adventure, and he didn't know what amazing things would happen next. Daniel and his friends were given delicious food to eat from the king's table. There were all kinds of fancy meals, but Daniel remembered God's rules about what to eat. He didn't want to break God's special rules. Even though the food looked yummy, Daniel and his friends decided to ask for vegetables and water instead. They knew it was important to follow God's way, even when everyone else was eating the king's food. The servant in charge was worried. He thought Daniel and his friends would get weak if they only ate vegetables. Daniel told the servant, "Give us just 10 days. If we look healthy, you can let us keep eating our way." The servant agreed, but he still wasn't sure. He watched Daniel and his friends closely to see what would happen. After 10 days, Daniel and his friends were stronger and healthier than anyone else in the palace. The servant was amazed. He let them keep following God's rules, and Daniel learned that God would always help him when he made good choices. Daniel and his friends became very wise. They studied hard and learned many things in Babylon, but they never forgot about God. Every day, they prayed and asked God for wisdom, and he gave them more understanding than anyone else in the land. King Nebuchadnezzar noticed how smart and wise Daniel and his friends were. He was very impressed with them. He gave them important jobs in the palace, and they became trusted servants of the king. Daniel knew it was because God had blessed him. One night, King Nebuchadnezzar had a strange dream. He didn't understand what it meant, and none of his wise men could help him. The king was very upset. He called for Daniel, hoping that he could explain the dream. Daniel prayed to God and asked for wisdom. God showed Daniel the meaning of the dream. Daniel went to the king and told him everything. King Nebuchadnezzar was amazed at Daniel's wisdom and knew that God was with him. King Nebuchadnezzar's dream was strange. He saw a giant statue made of different materials: gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. The statue was huge and shiny, but suddenly, a big stone came from the sky and smashed the statue into pieces. The stone grew into a big mountain that covered the whole earth. The king was confused and didn't know what it meant, but Daniel told him, "God has shown you the future, King Nebuchadnezzar. The statue means that different kingdoms will come after yours. But in the end, God's kingdom will be the strongest of all. It will last forever." When the king heard this, he was amazed. He bowed down before Daniel and said, "Truly, your God is the greatest of all gods." Daniel was made one of the highest rulers in Babylon because of his wisdom. But Daniel didn't become proud. He always thanked God for helping him. Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were also given important jobs. The king trusted them all. Daniel and his friends were faithful to God, and God blessed them in the land of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar was so proud of his kingdom that he built a giant golden statue. It was as tall as a building. He ordered everyone to bow down and worship the statue when they heard the music play. If anyone refused, they would be thrown into a fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew that only God should be worshipped. They wouldn't bow down to the golden statue, no matter what the king said. When the music played, everyone bowed down, but the three friends stood tall. The king's soldiers noticed them and told the king. King Nebuchadnezzar was very angry. He called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to him and said, "If you don't bow down, I will throw you into the fiery furnace. Who will save you then?" But they bravely answered, "Our God can save us from the fire. But even if he doesn't, we will never worship your statue." The king was furious. He ordered the furnace to be made 7 times hotter. The soldiers threw the 3 friends into the blazing fire. But something amazing happened. Inside the fire, they were not burning. The king saw 4 people walking in the flames, and one of them looked like an angel. King Nebuchadnezzar was shocked. He quickly called out, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out." And when they stepped out of the fire, everyone was amazed. Their clothes weren't burnt, and they didn't even smell like smoke. The king couldn't believe his eyes. He said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. No other God can save like this." From that day, the king told everyone in Babylon that no one was allowed to speak against the God of Israel. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego trusted God, and he protected them. Their faith was so strong that even a fiery furnace couldn't harm them. The king gave them even more important jobs in the land, and they continued to serve God faithfully. Daniel was very proud of his friends, and together, they kept trusting in God. Daniel knew that as long as they followed God, nothing could ever stand against them. This miracle became a famous story in all of Babylon. Some time passed, and King Nebuchadnezzar had another dream. This time, he saw a big, tall tree that touched the sky. It had many branches and leaves, and animals lived under it. But then, a voice from heaven said, "Cut down the tree and leave only the stump." The king didn't know what this dream meant. The king called for Daniel again. Daniel prayed to God and told the king what the dream meant. "The tree is you, King Nebuchadnezzar," Daniel said. "You have become strong and powerful, but you must be careful not to become proud. If you do, God will humble you, just like the tree in your dream." Daniel warned the king to be kind and humble, but King Nebuchadnezzar didn't listen. One day, while he was walking in his palace, he said, "Look at this great city I have built. I am the most powerful king in the world." Just then, a voice from heaven spoke again. God told the king that he would lose his kingdom for a time because of his pride. King Nebuchadnezzar went out to live in the fields like an animal. He ate grass, and his hair grew long. But God had not forgotten him. When the king humbled himself and prayed, God restored his kingdom. King Nebuchadnezzar lived like an animal for a long time. He wandered in the fields, ate grass, and grew long hair and nails. But one day, he looked up to the sky and remembered God. He realized that God is the true king over everything and that he needed to be humble before him. When King Nebuchadnezzar prayed to God and asked for forgiveness, something amazing happened. His mind became clear again, and he was able to return to his palace. His servants welcomed him back, and the people of Babylon were happy to see their king again. King Nebuchadnezzar was thankful to God. He told everyone in Babylon, "God is the ruler of the whole earth. He has power over all kings, and his kingdom will last forever." From that day on, the king knew that all his power came from God alone. Daniel saw how God had worked in the king's life. He continued to serve faithfully in Babylon, always trusting in God's plan. Daniel knew that God could change anyone's heart, even the heart of a king. Many years passed, and a new king came to rule over Babylon. His name was King Belshazzar. But unlike King Nebuchadnezzar, King Belshazzar didn't respect God. He threw big parties and didn't care about doing what was right. One day, King Belshazzar had a big feast with his friends. He ordered that the gold cups from God's temple be brought out, and they drank from them. This made God very angry because those cups were supposed to be holy. King Belshazzar didn't care. He thought he could do whatever he wanted. Suddenly, something strange happened. A mysterious hand appeared and started writing words on the wall. Everyone at the feast was terrified. No one could read the writing or understand what it meant. The king was so scared that his knees were shaking. The queen remembered Daniel and told the king, there is a man who can explain mysteries. His name is Daniel, and God's Spirit is with him." King Belshazzar called for Daniel, hoping he could tell them what the writing meant. Daniel arrived at the palace and saw the strange writing on the wall. He knew that God had sent this message. The words were mean, tekel, parsin. The king asked Daniel to explain what it meant. Daniel told the king, "Mean means that God has numbered the days of your kingdom and it will come to an end. Tekel means you have been weighed on God's scales, and you have not done what is right. Parsin means your kingdom will be divided and given to others." King Belshazzar was shocked and scared. He had thought he was the most powerful king, but Daniel told him that God was in charge of everything. Even though the king didn't listen to God, Daniel spoke the truth bravely. That very night, King Belshazzar's kingdom was taken away. A new king named Darius came to rule. Daniel trusted God, knowing that even though the rulers changed, God was still in control of everything. Now, King Darius was the ruler of Babylon. He liked Daniel and made him one of the most important leaders in the kingdom. But some other men were jealous of Daniel because the king trusted him so much. They didn't like how Daniel always prayed to God. These jealous men came up with a sneaky plan. They went to King Darius and said, "Make a new law that says everyone must pray only to you, King Darius, for 30 days. Anyone who disobeys will be thrown into the lion's den." The king didn't realize their plan was to trap Daniel. So he agreed to the law. Daniel heard about the new law, but he wasn't afraid. He knew that praying to God was more important than any law. So, 3 times a day, Daniel went to his room, knelt by his window, and prayed to God just like he always did. The jealous men saw Daniel praying and went to the king. "Daniel has broken your law," they said. King Darius was very sad because he didn't want Daniel to be punished, but the law couldn't be changed. Daniel would have to be thrown into the lion's den. That night, Daniel was taken to the lion's den. The king tried to find a way to save him, but the law couldn't be changed. Daniel was thrown into the dark den with the hungry lions. The king said, "May your God, whom you serve faithfully, save you." The lions roared around Daniel, but he wasn't afraid. He prayed to God and trusted that God would protect him. As Daniel prayed, God sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions. The lions lay down and didn't harm Daniel at all. King Darius couldn't sleep all night. He was so worried about Daniel. As soon as the sun rose, the king rushed to the lion's den. "Daniel, has your God saved you?" he called. And from inside the den, Daniel's voice came back, "Yes, my God sent an angel, and I am safe." The king was overjoyed. He ordered that Daniel be taken out of the den. Daniel didn't have a single scratch. King Darius praised God and made a new law that everyone in his kingdom must respect the God of Daniel, for he is the living God who saves. King Darius was so happy that Daniel was safe. He knew that God had protected Daniel because of his faith. But the men who had tried to trap Daniel were not so lucky. The king was very angry at them for their trickery and for trying to harm Daniel. King Darius gave an order that the men who had plotted against Daniel should be thrown into the lion's den. The lions, who had been calm when Daniel was inside, now roared loudly. The men didn't stand a chance. The lions were very hungry. And they attacked them right away. Everyone in the kingdom saw what had happened. They realized that Daniel's God was the true God, and that no harm could come to those who trusted in him. Daniel's enemies were gone, and Daniel continued to live safely under the king's protection. From that day on, King Darius told all the people in his kingdom to worship Daniel's God. He made a new law saying, "The God of Daniel is the living God. His kingdom will last forever, and he rescues his people from danger." Daniel's faithfulness had shown the world how great God is. One night, Daniel had a very strange dream. In his dream, he saw 4 giant, terrifying beasts rising up out of the sea. Each beast looked different and scarier than the last. Daniel knew this dream was important, but he didn't understand what it meant. The first beast looked like a lion with wings. It was strong and mighty, but its wings were torn off, and it stood up like a man. The second beast looked like a bear, and it was chewing on bones. It had 3 ribs in its mouth and seemed very fierce. The third beast was like a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings. It was very fast and dangerous. But the fourth beast was the scariest of all. It had iron teeth and 10 horns. It crushed everything in its path, and 1 small horn on its head had eyes and spoke like a person. Daniel was very frightened by these beasts. But then, in his dream, he saw a throne in heaven. God, the Ancient of Days, sat on the throne, shining with light. The beasts were judged by God, and the fourth beast was destroyed. This vision left Daniel puzzled and wondering what it meant. After seeing the 4 beasts in his dream, Daniel saw something even more amazing. In the clouds, he saw someone like the Son of Man coming before God's throne. God gave the Son of Man power and glory, and his kingdom would last forever. Daniel didn't understand what the dream meant, so he asked one of the angels in the vision to explain it to him. The angel told Daniel, the 4 beasts are 4 kingdoms that will rise on the earth. But in the end, God will destroy these kingdoms, and his kingdom will rule forever. The angel told Daniel that the last kingdom, represented by the 4th beast, would be especially cruel. It would try to harm God's people. But God would rescue his people, and the kingdom of heaven would take over the earth. Though the dream was scary, Daniel felt comforted knowing that God's kingdom would win in the end. He knew that no matter how powerful earthly kingdoms seemed, God's power was greater. Daniel kept this vision in his heart and trusted God's plan. One day, Daniel had another vision. This time, he saw a ram with 2 big horns standing by a river. The ram was strong and charged in every direction, defeating everything in its path. No one could stop the ram, but then, a fierce goat appeared. It had a single horn between its eyes, and it ran straight at the ram. The goat knocked down the ram and broke its horns, defeating it easily. The goat became very powerful, but soon its big horn was broken, and 4 smaller horns grew in its place. Out of one of the small horns came a terrible ruler who was very cruel. This ruler stopped the people from worshipping God, and he destroyed many things. Daniel was very sad when he saw this part of the vision. He didn't understand why this was happening. An angel named Gabriel appeared to Daniel and explained the vision. He said, the ram and the goat represent kingdoms that will rise and fall. But in the end, the evil ruler will be defeated, and God's people will be restored. Though the vision was hard to understand, Daniel trusted God's promise. Daniel loved his people, the Israelites. Even though he had been living in Babylon for many years, he still prayed for his people every day. One day, Daniel was reading the writings of the prophet Jeremiah, and he realized something important. The prophet Jeremiah had written that God's people would be in exile for 70 years. Daniel knew that the 70 years were almost over, and he wanted to ask God to forgive his people and bring them back to their home in Israel. Daniel knelt down and prayed, "O God, we have sinned against you, but please forgive us. Help your people return to the land you promised us. Show us your mercy and bring us home." Daniel prayed with all his heart, asking God to keep his promise. While Daniel was still praying, the angel Gabriel appeared to him again. Gabriel told Daniel that God had heard his prayer. He promised that God would restore the people of Israel, but it would happen in God's perfect timing. Daniel felt comforted, knowing that God was listening to his prayers. After Daniel prayed for his people, the angel Gabriel came to him with an important message. Gabriel told Daniel about a vision of 70 weeks. This wasn't about regular weeks, but about periods of time that God had set for the future. Gabriel said these weeks would be part of God's plan to save his people. The vision showed that many difficult things would happen, but God would send a savior, a special person, to make everything right. This savior would put an end to sin and bring everlasting peace. Daniel was excited to hear about this promise from God. However, Gabriel also warned that before this savior came, the city of Jerusalem would be rebuilt, but many troubles would follow. There would be wars, and even the holy city and temple would be destroyed again. But God's plan would never fail. Daniel didn't fully understand everything Gabriel said, but he trusted God's timing. He knew that, even though hard times were coming, God was always in control and would bring his people to a future full of hope. As Gabriel continued explaining the vision, he told Daniel about an anointed one, a special ruler who would come. This person would be the Savior promised by God. He would help fix all the problems that sin had caused in the world. Gabriel also said that after the anointed one came, he would be rejected by many people. The city of Jerusalem would face great trouble, and enemies would come to destroy it. But God had a plan, and in the end, he would defeat evil once and for all. Daniel realized that these 70 weeks showed a story of waiting, hope, and trust in God. It was a story that would take time to unfold, but in the end, God would bring peace to his people. Daniel felt comforted, knowing that God's plans were always good, even if they took time. Though the vision was hard to understand, Daniel kept it in his heart. He trusted that God's promise of a Savior would come true, and he continued praying for his people, knowing that God was listening and preparing something amazing. One day, as Daniel was praying, he had a vision that left him trembling. He saw a shining figure standing by the river. This figure looked like an angel and had a face that glowed like lightning. Daniel was so overwhelmed that he fell to the ground. The angel touched Daniel and said, "Don't be afraid, Daniel. From the moment you started praying, God heard you. I was sent to give you understanding, but on the way, I was delayed by a powerful evil spirit." The angel explained that there was a spiritual battle going on. The forces of good, led by God's angels, were fighting against the forces of evil. The angel said he was delayed for 21 days by the prince of Persia, but the archangel Michael came to help him. Daniel was amazed. He had never realized that battles were happening in the spiritual world. The angel told him that even though evil spirits tried to stop God's plans, God's angels were stronger, and they would win the battle in the end. The angel continued to tell Daniel about the future. He said that many rulers would rise and fall, and there would be wars and struggles. But in the end, God would defeat all the evil forces, and his kingdom would last forever. The angel explained that there would be times when things would look very dark. Evil rulers would try to hurt God's people, and there would be suffering. But the angel reassured Daniel, saying, "Do not fear, Daniel. God's people will be saved in the end." Even though the vision was filled with battles and hardships, Daniel felt peace knowing that God's angels were fighting for his people. He knew that, no matter how difficult things might get, God's power would win over evil. Daniel prayed again, thanking God for sending the angel to explain these things. He knew that the future might hold challenges, but he trusted that God was with him and with his people, guiding them every step of the way. In Daniel's old age, he received one final vision from God. In this vision, Daniel saw great battles between kings of the north and south. These kings would fight each other, and many people would be caught in the middle of their wars. The angel told Daniel that these battles would happen over many years. Some kings would be strong, while others would fall. The wars would cause much suffering, but through it all, God would remain in control. In the vision, Daniel saw that one of these kings would be very evil. He would do terrible things and even try to stop people from worshiping God. This king would think he was more powerful than anyone else, but the angel said his time would come to an end. Daniel listened carefully to the angel's message. Even though it was hard to hear about the coming troubles, Daniel trusted that God would protect his people and that, in the end, all the kings and kingdoms would bow to God's rule. The angel continued explaining the vision to Daniel. He said that in the last days, there would be a time of great trouble, worse than anything that had ever happened before. But the angel also gave Daniel hope, saying, "At that time, your people will be delivered. Everyone whose name is written in God's book will be saved." The angel told Daniel that there would be a resurrection. People who had died would be raised to life again. Some would rise to everlasting life with God, and others to everlasting judgment. This was a promise that God would one day make everything right. Daniel was amazed by this vision. He learned that, even though the world would face difficult times, God would bring justice and salvation to those who trusted in him. The angel told Daniel to seal up the vision, for it was about things that would happen in the distant future. With this final vision, Daniel's heart was filled with peace. He had seen many troubling things, but he also saw the glorious end of God's plan. He knew that, in the end, God's kingdom would be victorious, and his people would be with him forever. After receiving the final vision, Daniel's heart was full of both peace and questions. The angel told Daniel that the visions were for the distant future, and that Daniel's role was to write them down and trust in God's plan. Daniel knew that he might not see everything come true in his lifetime, but he believed in God's promises. The angel encouraged Daniel, saying, "You will rest, and at the end of days, you will rise to receive your inheritance." This was a promise that Daniel would one day be with God forever. No matter what happened in the world around him, Daniel spent the rest of his days continuing to serve God faithfully. He remained in Babylon, praying for his people and trusting that God was guiding their future. Though many years had passed since he first came to Babylon, Daniel never forgot God's faithfulness. As Daniel grew older, he became even more confident in God's plan. He knew that no matter what the future held, God was in control. His life became a testament to faith and trust in God, showing that even in the toughest times, God's love never fails.